Hi, this is Sarah Mikesell with the Pig Site, and today we're here with Dr. Karl Skold. He is an ag economist with JBS. Thanks for being with us today, Karl.
Thank you, Sarah. It's a pleasure to be here at Iowa State and the Swine Day here this morning.
Yeah, very good. And you were one of our speakers today. Can you tell us a little bit about your message to the audience today? And you were specifically talking, I should say, about kind of global economic conditions right now.
I think what we've seen is just a slowdown in expectations of growth throughout the world. We've had relatively high inflation rates that's hurting consumers throughout the world, both on the food side and the energy side. So I think consumers are slowly starting, especially in both worldwide, but even in the U.S., being more selective on what they buy and trying to save a little money because they're seeing high gas prices and high energy food prices. So we're starting to see that, but consumers still have been fairly resilient in the U.S. and continue to spend, and we'll see how that changes through the rest of the year into next year.
Could you talk a little bit about specifically about pork, but also about beef and chicken? Because you talked a little bit about that, those specific, I guess, the influences of the world and how and what those influences are doing to not just pork but other meats as well.
I think on the beef side, we've seen a liquidation of the U.S. cow herd, and a lot of that's due to drought. Both was last year in the northern plains and still lingering drought in the southern plains up into the Midwest or into like Nebraska and so I think that will likely reduce beef production into next year, and we've seen that anticipated by the futures market, and I think that will make less available proteins to compete with pork into next year. Chicken, on the other hand, is kind of a slow growth, and we've seen relatively slow growth this year and likely moderate growth into next year. So I think we've seen very strong prices. In part, dark meat prices have been strong. Ukraine was a large part of the world trade, like a little over 3% of the world's trade. And so that's helped out chicken prices worldwide. Plus, as consumers look for value, they've moved to chicken, both in the U.S. and worldwide. So that's helped out chicken prices as well, which I think indirectly will help pork.
Very good. And what do some of these economic conditions really mean for producers today?
Well, I think we've been in an environment where we had high levels of income, really boosted by government payments to people throughout 2020 and 2021, and so we have some excess savings. So we're in a declining environment in terms of real incomes. Not that we've seen that completely yet, but I think we're in that path. So we've gone from exorbitant demand domestically to more, I'd say, normalized demand, and that feels bad. But I think pork has held up fairly well. We've seen the cutout hold up fairly well through this year, and so I think the part will be is as we go into the following year, likely we'll see continued slower economic growth and perhaps maybe not as robust job situation. So, but pork still has been a value item at retail. Butts, loins, ribs have been still fairly held up fairly well.
Very good. And one final question, really, just about, I guess, diseases. You talked a little bit about the impact of high path avian influenza on the poultry industry, but also maybe talk a little bit about African swine fever and what that has meant and continues to mean, I guess, for the pork industry.
Well, I think first we've seen the high path avian flu this year, similar to what we had in 2015, where it's really hurt the turkey industry and the egg laying industry. And so I think that we started the year with high turkey prices because we had lower production last year, but have maintained high prices. So that's going to be the case into next year. I know the USDA is expecting a recovery just like they had in 2016 in production. So I think that's one factor that's here in the U.S. right now. The second factor is African swine fever. We know it's still spreading into Europe, spread into Germany, and now Italy, and then it's been kind of even on the border of France. So that's something that's been a long-term move from east to west, and so it's still there. As well as in Asia, starting really in 2018 with China, and it's popped up here and there. It's very hard to understand of how bad or not it is, but by and large we've seen some recovery in production in a lot of countries. So we've seen, and especially we've seen recovery in China in production. We don't know exactly where it is, but prices would suggest they've gone back to levels what they were near the pre-pandemic level.
Very good. Well, we're it's interesting to see how those factors really impact not just the U.S. but North American prices and I guess the overall markets.
Yeah, and it's been interesting 4+ years of just
Right.
what's happened from ASF outbreaks to a trade war to now the Ukraine war impacting grain costs and fertilizer flows. So it's a challenging environment, but I think the U.S. hog industry has been real resilient through this and has done a great job of providing protein for the world, both from exports and also being a great source of protein for U.S. consumers.
Very good. And one final question for you is, I mean, based on what you showed, I guess today, those export opportunities to China, not just from the U.S. but all the countries that have been taking advantage of them needing pork, is ebbing away. Correct?
Well, I think they've already, we've seen a slowdown through last
Right.
year, so I don't know if if you look at USDA's export forecast, it's relatively flat for this year or for next year compared to this year. So a lot of that adjustment happened through last year, and so I think that part is a little bit done. I think a question is what's going to happen on out, and I think by and large a lot of people have shrinking EU production in pork, and we'll see what happens elsewhere, which I think stabilizes the U.S. outlook for exports. I think, and even with a not as robust China demand, so I think there's places of opportunities. It's just we're in an environment we know we're going to have shrinking incomes here for a bit and shrinking demand globally because of those lower incomes. But I think still we're in a good situation being a low-cost producer and having a good supply chains.
Very good. Well, thank you so much for your time today, Karl.
All right, thank you very much.
This is Sarah Mikesell with the Pig Site.